Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Prashani. I'll be chairing the session this morning. I'd like to start by welcoming all of you to our first breakfast seminar for 2020. And we're very happy to be kicking off with the launch of a book that has been produced as part of a SWOP research project that has unfortunately come to an end, called Hidden Voices. I'm not going to say too much about the book. I'm going to hand over to Kally Forrest, who has pulled the book together, has been the author of the book, and will also speak a little bit about the process that resulted in the book. Kally is currently an associate at SWOP. She has also written widely, in particular books on the trade union movement, and we're also happy that Kally continues to collaborate with us at SWOP in a number of research projects and other ways. I'm going to hand over to Kally to also explain a little bit the discussion this morning, because we are expecting a group from Oukasie that the book is based on to join us. Unfortunately, they're a little late, but Kally will tell us a little more about that too.
Good morning, everybody. Just to tell you that probably in the middle of this talk, a pile of people will come in, and we'll probably have to file up to the front here and sit. So they are the people from Oukasie who stuck out in Woodmead. But hopefully we'll get here before the session ends. I just really want to welcome you very warmly to this book launch, and to the book that's entitled Bonds of Justice, The Struggle for Oukasie. This book is really a story about Oukasie between 1980 and 2000. And you may say, well, where is Oukasie? Oukasie is in the northwest. It's right adjacent to Brits. This is actually a picture in the 1980s of Oukasie. It's adjacent to Brits, and when I say adjacent to Brits, it's literally a road away from Brits. And for those who don't know Brits, in the northwest, you perhaps know Hartbeespoort Dam. That's probably the other biggest place near to Brits. Oukasie was the subject of the last great removal attempt by the nationalist government in the 1980s. And they were helped by the Conservative Party at that time, who were in power in the Brits municipality. So we had this really concerted right-wing effort to finally remove Oukasie. You may be looking at me and thinking, why is a white middle-class woman who lives in Johannesburg in Gauteng writing about something in the northwest all that way away? So to tell you something about my background, in the 1980s I was involved in what was then the emerging trade union movement. It hadn't come to full power then, but it was building power. And it was a very close-knit group at that time. People spoke to each other, people who were in solidarity with the unions, people in the unions, spoke to each other about what was happening, what solidarity was needed, what strategies should be employed, and so on. And indeed, in Oukasie, in Brits, there was a struggle happening at the factory called the B&S factory. And this was not actually by the emerging trade union that it had been organized. It was organized firstly by some Brits activists, two of whom I met, Peter Duinkies and David Molimeng, and they had started to organize this factory, and that had resulted in 800 workers being dismissed. At that time, this factory mainly employed women from the neighboring homeland Botswana, but also from Oukasie itself. And their wages had really fell to absolutely unacceptable levels. So in 2012, I decided to go back and revisit this community, their labour struggles and their struggle against being removed. And I went to Professor Philip Bonner, now deceased, who was head of the Saatchi chair in the history department, and asked him if he would support me to do this, because I've been particularly impressed with that leadership all through those years of struggle. And because I had met a number of people from Oukasie. And he was willing to support me in this. He gave me resources to do this. And as you know, Phil had made a huge contribution to the beginning of decolonizing South Africa's history. So he was, for me, the kind of person that I wanted to back to do this project. He was also running a local history research in the Saatchi chair. When I wrote up the research, brought it back, and he looked at it, he said, "There's definitely a book in here, Kally." And so the book finally, in 2020, has come to fruition. Sadly, of course, Phil can't see it, but I do feel very good that it has actually happened. This book is really about the power of organization and the power of good leadership. I don't think that leadership just is inherent in people. Maybe there are very few people who do have real leadership qualities from birth. But I think in general, leadership is something that's nurtured, it's something that's experienced, it's something that is reflexive. You respond to your community that you're leading, and it's not just a given. And this is definitely true of this Oukasie group of leaders that were emerging. They came out of the YCW, the Young Christian Workers. And the Young Christian Workers was an organization that originated in Belgium, and it was very pro-poor, pro-worker, and a socialist in inflection. And there was a group of young people. There were branches, in fact, all over South Africa, all over the world, but all over South Africa, and there was a branch in Oukasie. And these young people operated according to a slogan, "See, Judge, Act." And in essence, that meant they would go out into the community, look at what was happening, see what the issues were, what the problems were, come back, talk about it in their group, and discuss what the priority should be, how they should proceed to change things, whether they should have a campaign, whether they should act as individuals, whatever. And then they would decide how they were going to act, how they were going to go into the community and act. So, for example, one person might decide that they were going to try and open up a new factory, and that they were going to try and recruit 5 workers from that factory. Then they would come back the next week, because in this organization, people met very regularly, and they would talk about what had happened, whether they'd been successful or not, what should happen next, how they had been involved in that particular activity. So it was also about reflecting on your own behavior, and then they would go out and act. Just fortuitously, at the time, the emerging trade union movement was working in a very similar way. It was working in a very, what I would call a participatory, democratic way, in a very accountable manner. And the union was really working in a kind of report and mandate fashion. So you would go, you'd get a mandate from people in your factory, the leadership would then go and act on that, come back, report on what had happened, and further discussion and a further mandate would happen. So these young men in Oukasie got hold of the union movement, particularly the metal unions who were operating in Pretoria at that time, Mawu and Nawu, and asked if they would come through to Brits and assist them. And so in essence you have really a political tradition emerging that was an alternative to the UDF, the United Democratic Front. and to the SACP tradition of organizing in a very participative and accountable way. As removal attempts by the nationalist government intensified in the 1980s, this leadership came to the fore, and the community were brought together in a meeting, and there was a decision to set up what was known as the BAC, the Brits Action Committee, to resist this removal. And I can't really go into detail, that's all in the book. But it was the YCW and the union leadership who came together to lead the BAC. And what is really remarkable, I think, about the BAC's organization at that time was the solidarity it engendered. It's very difficult, it's very easy to get people to come to a meeting and say, yes, we're going to do this. But maintaining solidarity is a very difficult thing to do. And especially as people became under increasing pressure in the community to move. The state was trying to move them to Gille, which was 20 kilometers away, but people felt very strongly they didn't want to move for various reasons, but a couple of them being it was very easy for them to walk to work, to their work in Brits. But I think a really strong thing was it was a very bonded community. People played soccer together, they supported soccer teams, people had religious groups, people talked to their neighbors, people hung up their washing together, people sold in the streets, the kids played in what were then the people's parks. And so people felt very bonded and very safe in that community, and they simply did not want to be moved. I think the other thing about this leadership at that time was there was an openness in a non-racial way to cooperate with other organizations who were in solidarity with them. So I'm thinking particularly of the Black Sash and the organization they spawned called TRAC, the Transvaal Rural Action Committee. And that TRAC was operating in South Africa, trying to assist people who were under threat of removal. And so there was this very easy and relaxed working with people from outside, as long as they were accountable to the community. I've really told you a very broad sweep account of what was happening at that time. So I'd like to call on Tshidi Mangoathe, who is here today from Oukasie. She was an activist in Oukasie in the 1980s. She was a member of the YCW. She was also a MAWU member, the Metal and Allied Workers Union member, and she was very active in this organization because a lot of organizations were spawned out of this removal attempt. So Tshidi is going to just tell us a little bit about how it felt to be in Oukasie at that time, in those struggle days, and also why she thinks that struggle was actually successful, how they repulsed the nationalist attempts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kally. Thank you to give me this opportunity to come and say a word of one word or two on how did we manage not to be removed from Oukasie. Allow me to observe protocol. With me, I have colleague Agnes Shashamakora, MEC member of the ANC Women's League. It's my colleague. Comrade Jacob Moatshe, who is also my brother, my colleague. from Oukasie, and I have Kally here, the one that we work with, and observe protocol in terms of the hierarchy of Wits University, the community of Gauteng at large, comrades and friends, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. Let me also welcome the community members. Some activists from Oukasie, they are now entering this world, and give them an opportunity just to settle for a few minutes so that I continue with the presentation. Firstly, let me acknowledge the struggle of Oukasie, that the first removal that was happening in 1985 was not the first, nor the second, or the third removal of the community of Oukasie to some parts of areas in Greece. Safe to say, starting from 1975, there were activists in Oukasie under the banner of the Young Christian Workers Movement and Young Christian Student Movement, which was from the Roman Catholic Church, which Kally has already alluded to that, where it was led by Comrade Mudau, Comrade Moatshe, Stephen Mangoathe, Comrade Shai, Comrade Makapelo Mokosi, Nengi Matlare, Wanda Makale, Peter Dani, Tshidi Mangoathe, to name but the few. There were also comrades who passed away, who played an important role during that era, which is Comrade Livi Mamabulo, Comrade Union Chongwane, Comrade Tabero Molokwane, Comrade Commodore Jacob Mahakwe, Comrade Ellen Kosa, Comrade Deborah Molekwa, David Musi, Johanna Tele, Sopna Moatshe. We have this, may their soul rest in peace. This group of people have young and youngest among them who were part and parcel of the struggle of Oukasie. Some of them were organizing the students in schools, while some of them were organizing workers in the factory, workers and the community at large. While we faced the first removal, which killed many people in Oukasie in 1985, we then managed to establish a Breast Action Committee to lead us. It was not so difficult to do it because the community of Oukasie have already been involved in some subcommittees in different areas, in different churches. You have church youth council, you have women in the churches, in society, and you name all this sort. And then we took it upon ourselves as the community and the community of Oukasie to say, we must have a structure that this structure will lead us in ensuring that they fight for this forced removal. Of course, some of us have got the feeling to say, but I think enough is enough, because our parents have been forcefully removed somewhere in Moatshe, somewhere in many different places. And it was that courage that brought us together to say, no, we are not moving from Oukasie to go to Litabile. Moreover, the rate of unemployed in Oukasie was very high. Then the Breast Action Committee identified Moatshe Matlaela to be one of the persons that we are going to test. The then authority applied for a house to stay in Oukasie, despite the fact that Oukasie was then declared emergency camp, SWOP or what? Yeah, that name. So Moatshe Matlaela, then the Transvaal Rural Action Committee, Black Search, Lawyers for Human Rights, all these organizations that were in solidarity with us in Oukasie, assisted us. Moatshe Matlaela won the case to have a house in Oukasie. And later, for us to be able to make sure that we were on the right track, we then have Comrade Nyambali, who has to then apply a site to live in Oukasie, and that was permitted. And to us, it was a victory to say, at least we have a way. And by then, remember, churches were forcefully demolished, schools and everything. But then the Breast Action Committee interdicted the authority not to demolish Oukasie Primary School and Botlhabelo High School. We succeeded. And the NPA, Wessel, Ethiopia, and many more other churches of apostolic, the Zion Christian churches, then stood firm and said, the people who were attending those churches and said, we are not going to move, we are staying here. And we are going to ensure that we clean Oukasie, and we are going to ensure that, irrespective of the community of Oukasie, most of them, those who were activists, were denied the opportunity to be employed in trades or in the industrial area. But the community and the women of Oukasie, Comrade Matapelo Mokoshi, here she is, and the late Comrade Ellen Koza, Joanna Tene, Comrade Nengi Matlare, ourselves. Then we start the organization, Oukasie Women's Movement, where then we interact with other women from Driefontein, Matupestad, Huhudi, and many more others, where they were faced with forced removal. Then we jointly make it a point that we visit one another, we exchange programs in terms of how are we dealing with issues that face us on a daily basis. Then, as a woman, we started making food gardening in every community member in Oukasie to have something to eat, so that we don't go bed with a hungry stomach and our children have malnutrition problem. We have the health committees, we have the SGBs. Breast Action Committee makes subcommittees. Subcommittee that consisted with all what was needed to run the state or to run the community. Safety committee, sports and arts committees, we have them. We have comrades like Bokomodo, those were from art and culture, and they assisted in making sure that we unite and make sure that we are not moving. We supported one another, and as time goes on, the Breast Action Committee established Oukasie Development Trust. Oukasie Development Trust is the trust that ensured that Oukasie is developed. They managed to build schools, churches, community halls on our own without the help of the state. And when Kally asked me what did the struggle feel like and the community of Oukasie. Honestly speaking, it was very difficult because most of the community members live in fear. They were not employed. Their houses were bombed. Some were detained after the strike in the factory being shop steward auto cable, 1985, detention, 88 detention without trial. We were there 3 months, myself, Comrade Nenki and Jacobo, and other community members, activists. But we never stopped. We said that Aluta continue. The struggle is not end, but we have to continue and fight. Then at the end, the atmosphere, of course, remember that was not a soft thing. The regime then was very hard on us, and the community was tense. Every time when the soldiers came in during the night, they bombed some other comrades' houses, like Comrade Jacob Moatshe and many others. They petrol bombed their house. But the horrible incident, which I will never forget, is the bomb that was then, hand grenade that was then brutally killed the late Comrade Joyce Nkele, leaving a child who was 6 months. By the grace of God, she came out of that whole horrible situation. She's still alive. Nana Bob, she's there in Oukasie. May the soul of Comrade Joyce Mujimwe rest in peace. We have the distractors, the vigilantes. Yes, the vigilantes were there, Askaris killing our comrades, but we have never stopped. We are never stopped. We are never scared. We used to say Aluta continue. And at the end we said that nothing can defeat the willing mind and the united force. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tshidi, for giving us just a little snippet. Sadly, we don't have more time to let it continue with the account. But I think up to now we've been talking a lot. And it's always nice to have a visual image of what was happening there. And in this case, we are really lucky that Gille Vlieg did exactly this. In the 1980s, she went out to Oukasie and she took images of everyday life there. And a number of these images are in the book, for which I'm extremely grateful because I think they give real life to the book. And I would just like to ask Gille, wherever you are, to come up and just to take us through some of these images and tell us a little bit about what they were, and to also give you a big thank you for allowing me to use them in the book.
Right. I just would like to give you a very short explanation of why I was in Oukasie. I was a member of the Johannesburg branch of the Black Sash, and the Johannesburg branch of the Black Sash created the Transvaal Rural Action Committee because they realized that as volunteers, Black Sash volunteers, they couldn't cope with the amount of work that needed to be done in rural areas. And so I happened to be part of Afripex, the photographic cooperative, and but also as a member of the Black Sash, I wanted to record what was happening in the areas in which we were working, and to show the people's spirit of how they were resisting. And I felt it was very important that nobody should be allowed to say we didn't know these things were happening. That was very much at the back of my mind. So what I have chosen for this morning is not the complete portfolio of what I have taken in Oukasie. There is going to be a longer version of that sometime later. But I just wanted to show you the type of situation that people were living in. But also I'm hoping that what will also come across is the vibrancy of that area. And I haven't included a lot of the struggle images, but I have hopefully put in enough images of the activists so that you can get a feeling of that wonderful resistance that arose out of the spirit of the people in Oukasie. So this is an overview from one of the koppies around Oukasie, and as you can see in the back, there are suburban houses there. That is the area called Elandsrand. And one of the reasons that the government was using to try and remove Oukasie was to say, well, Elandsrand needs more area. And there's a wonderful quote actually from Sipho Selo. Yes. And he said that the blacks are not encroaching on the whites are actually encroaching on the blacks. That was one of his quotes. And then this is another view where you can see the Brits industrial area in the background. And this was one of the original government houses when Oukasie was established. It was just a one-roomed shack, as you can see. And then as Oukasie grew, houses joined together to create space. There are quite a lot of dogs in Oukasie. Now this is a house in Litleville. This was the Temptation House that they tried to attract people from Oukasie to go and live in Litleville. So it's sort of rather typical suburban type of house. And this is a street in Elandsrand, the white suburb. These are the conditions that the government allowed to have in Oukasie. They gave very, very few services. As they say, they didn't grade the roads. There are only a few outside taps, I think 50, and all these images were taken between 1986 and 1988. And even in 1988, there were still only 50 taps for the whole area. They had to use bucket toilets. There was a school, and it's still there. Is the school still there, Steve?
Where is the new school?
It's a new school.
Okay. And of course, always a graveyard.
Yeah.
And that becomes a very important focus of people's resistance to removal as well. The people who are buried, their ancestors that are buried in the graveyard. And then these are members of the Brits Action Committee. I can see some of the faces lighting up here. You see these people again. And that's Lele Mamaboyo. And you can start seeing the influence of the unions coming in. This is Ellen Koza.
Marshall
Base, yeah. Moatshe.
Jacob.
Okay.
Yes.
Who is that?
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Okay.
Maton.
Yes. Yes, she was very strong.
Yes. It's our Winnie Monday.
And Sarah. And Emily.
So,
Yeah. And this is
David,
David, whose wife was killed in the attack on his house. But people also had a way of managing their environment and used all sorts of creative ways of sort of brightening it up. And the people of the area managed through various support groupings to get Dr. Medicine Sans Frontières doctor in the area. Excuse my French. And also to create a community creche. And as Tshidi was telling us, the women of the area were incredibly strong. They actually decided that they weren't just going to sit in their homes and just watch what was happening to them. They were going to get out there and on the streets and resist in various ways. These are some unemployed people outside of the factories. They used to go in every day and just sit outside in the hopes of being employed. A general dealer. But then also the little spaza shops. The churches. And then, as Tshidi was saying, that the apartheid government would come and break down houses and then refuse to allow people to actually take over the plots. And so you'd wander around the area and there would be all these houses that are broken down. But people resisted. You know, when as part of the resistance, they started rebuilding homes or taking over empty areas and rebuilding them. And then this wonderful energy that sort of came through the Gauteng area, really, where people felt that if the government wasn't going to sort of improve their areas, they were going to do it for themselves. And they created these amazing peace parks. I was able to take some images of them in Alexandria, where there were quite a lot, and Tembisa, and sort of throughout the areas of the East Rand and in Soweto as well. And people would congregate and gather under the shade of the trees. And his T-shirt says, "When I grow up, I want to be a doctor." And here's some of the grouping of the women coming together. And your vegetable gardens. And they cleared the weeds in the area. Again, the spirit of we are going to do it for ourselves coming through. Helping to repair the roads, encouraging the taxi drivers and the youth to help them. And then protest meetings in the local hall. And again, you can see the union influence coming through. Namibia. Type of vibrancy in the street. And then collecting as families. Creating their own environments and their own home spaces. Lesbian. music, always music. As you would go around these areas, you would hear the music coming out of the taxis. And even the school children getting into the spirit of, we are not going to move. And that's you! That's me. I'll leave it there.
You've not changed at all.
So Joel has just showed us some wonderful images of the period of resistance against removal in Oukasie. But this was to be followed by a particularly dark period. As the state saw there was successful resistance in Oukasie, but not only Oukasie, countrywide, as people were rising up and rebelling against apartheid. We find there was a concerted attempt by the state to smash organization. And of course, Tshidi did allude to that already. She spoke about how terrifying it was to live in Oukasie at that time. In 1986, there was a state of emergency declared and there were mass detentions. All the leadership of BAP were detained, leadership of other organizations in Oukasie were detained. There were murders, there were assassinations, there were fire bombings of the leadership's housing in Oukasie. And so a kind of period of terrible fear was ushered into the streets of Oukasie. And as you can see in Oukasie, it was a vibrant place, it was a happy place, despite its poverty. It had these twisted little alleyways. Now people were too scared to go out at night into those alleyways. They were too scared to go to meetings. They were too scared that what would happen in the darkness of those nights if you were walking somewhere to decide to organize something. And so inevitably organization fractured. People would not go to meetings anymore, and there were other activities that were happening in the night that were very underground. And so what I think is absolutely remarkable about Oukasie and Oukasie's people is that despite this, immediately in the early 1990s, this was through to the late 80s, the early 1990s, immediately the state decided that there would be a reprieve on the removals and people were let out of detention. There was an initiative to start to develop Oukasie in a really serious way. And this was very much to do with a very deeply embedded leadership in Oukasie. It was a strong leadership, and it was very much in communication with all the people of Oukasie who had decided to stay there. And I mean, to cut a long story short, there was something called the ODT, which Tshidi also referred to. The Oukasie Development Trust was launched, and it had a very strong board, and in particular people, when I interviewed out in Oukasie, remembered Levi Mamabolo, who was he was from Nomsa. He was a head shop steward in Nomsa, and the way that people often described him was he was very wise, and he was a Mandela type figure, and he was very crucial in this initiative to move forward and develop Oukasie. What was interesting about this development initiative is that the people of Oukasie were very willing to invite outsiders in to assist them. They didn't see it as an intrusion. If they invited people outside to assist them, it would be on their terms and they would have to be accountable to the people of Oukasie. So we find that it's a non-racial initiative driven by the people of Oukasie. So you have accountants who were assisting, lawyers, people who knew about housing, people who knew in depth about really good development were coming in and assisting the ODT. And today, again, as Tshidi mentioned, we have Jacob Moatshe, who's here, and he was on the ODT. He was firstly a member of the Community Liaison Committee. He was the liaison officer, and later the CEO. And I've just asked him to come here today to talk about what were the obstacles in developing Oukasie at the time, and what do you think your major successes were? And also, how did you keep the community on board in this development initiative? Yeah.
I think I need to make a few corrections in terms of who decided that Oukasie should remain. And I think it is the people, not the government. They were forced to have Oukasie remain where it is today by virtue of the struggles that we have in solidarity. My name is Jacob Moatshe. I have been involved with the Oukasie community from time immemorial. I'm actually privileged to be here and acknowledge amongst other people my sister N. Mukoshi, who worked with me through the time of the struggle and transcending into the Development Trust. And Ephraim Mahapa Mukwala, who used to be with us throughout the struggle as well. Most of the people who are mentioned in this in the book most of them have passed on the leadership of Oukasie, some through natural causes and others through violent state repression. Now, before I also mentioned the involvement of the Oukasie Development Trust, let me make an emphasis on the Young Christian Workers Movement. The origin of the Young Christian Workers Movement was within the Catholic Church and through the papal encyclical Rerum Novarum, which was in response to the atrocities after the Industrial Revolution and after the Great War. A Belgian priest, a cardinal actually, took over the call from the Pope to help young workers in Europe who were exposed to atrocities of capital and monopoly capital, not white monopoly capital, as it is now coined in the political context of South Africa. The request that was made, and I want also to give emphasis to some of the organizational imperatives: community participation, the involvement of the trade union movement through the Young Christian Workers Movement from the period 1985 onwards, the time of total onslaught and comprehensive strategies by the regime, the last very atrocious regime on planet Earth. Even if we hear that now, Gille is saying that apartheid was not a sin, and his apology, but we know that it was declared by the United Nations as a crime against humanity. The Breath Action Committee, and it has always been within the revolutionary consciousness of the people when they fought against Oukasie, against the repression, that they wanted to improve the general conditions, living conditions of the people. That has always been in their minds. Therefore, it was through the Oukasie Development Trust consciousness and willingness to have to enhance that consciousness the revolutionary consciousness of development, and as you have seen how Gille has portrayed how the people were involved during the time when the resources were taken away from them deliberately and consciously by the regime. So those leaders who were elected were predominantly leaders who were involved one way or the other, either in the community or in the trade union movement, or were members of prominent teams. Soccer was the main activity. And those leaders of the action committee who were elected on that fateful day after hearing that Oukasie will be disestablished by the regime, Chris Jennes, at the time was Minister of Constitutional Development and Planning, decided to, there was a caption on the Sowetan where they shown Chris Jennes with a rubber removing Oukasie from Yela's land. So I think by that time Marshal Bays, who was brutally murdered during the struggle after meeting the ANC in exile in London, when the state decided to create havoc and bring the community into disrepute through their forces, the security forces, was I think the chairperson of the action committee. Moshe Matala became treasurer, and Silo Ramakube, I think, the secretary. So these were activists who were within the Young Christian Workers movement, and some of them working in the factories, like Kally has alluded to the fact that they were activists working within the formation of one of the most powerful trade unions in the country, which later was culminated into Fossatu unions, NUMSA, and later on Fossatu. But let me explain now how we managed, after the reprieve of Oukasie, to bring about a developmental change in Oukasie. The civic association, which was initially running the affairs of the town, because there was no local council, it virtually disappeared during the time when we started fighting in Oukasie. When we celebrated St. Joseph the Worker in the Catholic Church in 1982 onward, that was the beginning of starting to mobilize the people within, and I must always emphasize the importance of churches in the liberation struggle. If you have noted, and I'm saying it against whatever, you won't note that there was a political flag of any political organization, because we operated during the time when the ANC was buried in exile. So the people in Oukasie only knew the working class struggle through the trade union movement. And that is one feature that made Oukasie different from, very unique from other struggles, because it was quite within the working class and the trade union and civil participation, not political organization. And I am making it without reservation. The only leading force to the victory of Oukasie was through the trade union movement. There might have been sympathetic gestures from the African National Congress, for example, in exile, but it was virtually not there because of the state of repression in the country. But the Oukasie struggle was part of the general struggle in the country. It was not a unique struggle as it is. There were other struggles like in Alexandra, like in Mohopa and other places, which brought up that solidarity in Oukasie. In 1990, upon the reprieve of Oukasie, a development trust was formed through the Civic Association and the Friends of Oukasie through other academic formations like Wits University. You know, some of the people played an important role by virtue of through the Legal Resources Center, linking us with the city of Berkeley in California, who were very, very upfront in influencing Congress to implement comprehensive and mandatory sanctions against South Africa. And that is one of the most important features that led to the international solidarity of Oukasie. And that later on transcended into some of the people helping us in the developmental epoch of the Oukasie struggle. 5 minutes. So the community in Oukasie organized itself into the Oukasie People's Delegation, the Oukasie Civic Association that formed the Oukasie Development Trust. And all these committees that were involved were the education committee that have to see to it that schools were built, crèches were built. Of course, there was also a crèche committee. The fundraising committee, I think, and belonged to the fundraising committee. The technical committee, which comprised of the friends of the Oukasie community, the Eben Foundation people helped, Planet, and many other people who came into the fore. And part of the union members, like Tafi Adler that used to work with us, Jeff Batlender through the Legal Resources Center. There was no money. As you can see for yourself on the pictures, the community was very poor. We started by collecting 50 cents so that we can start with a pen and paper. And upon registration of that trust, we started to write to the South African Council of Churches a proposal. I didn't even know how to write a funding proposal. Skills were transferred actually from that. And the trust also comprised of, we deliberately took people who were also opposed to us, like the transitional, the council, the local council in Brits, the Transvaal Provincial Administration, members, and those were the people, and the local people, the local community, who helped us to build a development trust. And later on, the IDT came into the picture. We did a funding proposal that was accepted, and we started with the planning. We were helped by people like Uli Blau Women Associates, who were part and parcel of the technical committee, which played a very important role, of course, in the developmental sphere of Oukasie. The finance committee, which raised money to ensure that the development of Oukasie takes shape. And later on, we had the graveyard committee, because we had to remove graves and so on and so forth. So all these committees became part and parcel of a social compact that ensured the development of Oukasie. But I must also allude to the fact that it was the people themselves in Oukasie who consciously wanted their places to be developed and allowed space to be developed. And amongst other things that were very difficult was that you have an in situ upgrading as opposed to the green field. And in the in situ upgrading, that was very difficult because we found stands which were in that place, the people who historically have been there for ages, and you have to remove them, to shift them, we have to remove the graves, we have to pave new ways. But amongst other things that we have achieved was a bigger investment in infrastructure. We put in electricity, in high mast lights, we put in water, not the local municipality as it is today. We built up, I think, 3 schools, the high school, the primary school, 2 primary schools, and there's now a middle school, and a number of crèches, 2 clinics. All that was done through the participation of the community. We prioritized all what we took the mandate actually from them. So that was the biggest achievement we have had. But later on, that transcended into the Oukasie becoming a bigger player in the greater breast area. And that is part of another story in the developmental sphere, because you had the new breast hospital, which was as a result of the trust involvement in the health activity. Like we said, the Medicine du Monde also worked with us, and those Doctors Without Boundaries, the students at Medunsa, who were historically working with the Oukasie community during the time of the denial by the apartheid regime. So all those resources were brought together to ensure that the people of Oukasie benefit. But as for what we have done was to become a developer in the midst of the whole council. So it was not the Transvaal Provincial Administration that did develop the development, but it was the people of Oukasie through the Development Trust that ensured that we achieve all the services that we have today. The only sad part of it is that those were given to the new council. When we were part of the local council, it was one of the richest councils. But now it is one of the poorest councils. The Madibeng, which cannot supply people with water, which cannot provide people with services, which cannot maintain roads and water, which have stolen money of the poor people. So it is a complete reversal of this, it was actually the betrayal of justice. So we are now in the midst of what has been achieved, what has been accomplished, has been reversed through the current local. I'm not referring to those people who were running the municipality properly during the time of Vlieg Mamabulu, and when also Tshidi was involved in that. I'm referring to the council that took over some 10 years ago, that was involved in graft and mismanagement of resources of the entire community of Madibeng, as it is called today. So I think it is a new chapter that has to be rewritten about the involvement of actually it is very sad to know that it is not only the municipality in Brats and Madibeng. It is generally almost every municipality in South Africa that is affecting the freedoms that we've achieved through hardship. And I have to end up here because of the time factor, but the Oukasie story remains one of the most important stories of history. Thanks to Kally and to all the people who participated in bringing up a true history of the revolution of the people. I thank you.
Sorry, I want to let follow up what they said.
Yes, we're going to have a question time at the end.
Yeah.
So can you just wait now, and then there will be a period to ask questions. I think what is remarkable about the development period that Jacob is talking about. Now we're talking about a community which was really an informal settlement without, just had bucket soil sewerage. That was about all there was there. We're talking about a community that had nothing. And after this development initiative, and this initiative was made before 1994, not totally, but substantially before 1994, so it's before the dawn of democracy. They put in, as you mentioned, storage, water taps, housing, high mast lighting, electricity, recreation center, a library. I mean, it's unbelievable what this community achieved. I mean, it's quite inspirational. And to think that it all happened before the dawn of democracy, I can think of no other community that was able to achieve that. The book continues a bit to the period that you're talking about, up until 2000, when there was a period of the transitional local council in Brits. And it looks at what happens to Oukasie in that period and what happened to the leadership that we've been talking about. The book follows that leadership through. And I can't really talk about any more about it because we simply don't have time. I just want to say, if you may have seen, if you've looked at the book, that it comes out of the Hidden Voices series. And the Hidden Voices series was launched by the National Institute of humanities and social sciences. They launched it, they raised the money for these kind of books to be printed, and they worked with Jacana Media, the media house, very sympathetic to this kind of book, to get it published. And I have to give a very grateful thanks for their support and also for Jacana's support. And because of the resources available to bring the book, I was also able to get a very good editor in the form of Karen Pampalis. She was meticulous, hardworking, and very careful in going through the text. Before we go to an opening to a question time, I just want to say that I think it can't be underestimated what Oukasie achieved. There were many communities in South Africa that have simply been wiped off the map, that don't exist anymore because of removals. And it's only because of the feisty struggle that people from Oukasie put up that Oukasie actually exists today. So it is really a remarkable story that I thought I was being told by the people of Oukasie. We've got a period where a bit of time where we can ask questions. I know that it's very difficult to ask questions about a book that you haven't actually read, but there may be queries or comments that you'd like to make, and I also would like to encourage the people from Oukasie to please answer or make comments or whatever. Prashani will just take comments and questions, but I would also like to thank SWOP very much for all the work they did for this breakfast and for allowing me to launch this book in this space, which I think is a particularly comfortable and nice space.
Big thank you to Kally, to Tshidi, to Gille, and to Jacob. And also a really warm welcome to those of you who came in late, members of the community of Oukasie. I just want to say there has been some additional breakfast been put out for those of you who came late. I'd just like to ask that those of us who have had breakfast not go for second, if we can help ourselves. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to just open up both for any contributions from the people from Oukasie and then for any questions from the bigger group. If I can also ask you to just introduce yourself, please.
Good morning. My name is Case Banda. I'm a resident just around here in Johannesburg. There's a place 10 minutes walk from Vets Court area. I actually haven't read the book, so I won't say much about the book. But my question will be posed to the community members who are here. I'm very touched about what I've just heard sharing with us. Originally, I'm from Zimbabwe. Okay. During that time, during the struggle, at the height of the uprising, I was staying in Mamelodi, Pretoria. So your community, Northwest, Oukasie, as you call it, is closer to my heart. Actually, I've got a lot of things to say, but due to time constraints, my question will be, you highlighted that, Mr. Jacob, during your address there, that it was to improve the lives of the people, like what we saw from this slide there. Those were bad conditions. But looking today, actually the opportunity to have a chat with Mr. Semo Sonyane, the old Mr. That's right. So your community is said to be one of the most ravaged when it comes to the youngsters, when it comes to Nyaope. most probably because maybe they are frustrated, they've got nothing to do. So what are you doing in addressing those kind of situations? Yes, thank you. By the way, I think I must say that.
Okay, can we collect a few questions and then come back to answers?
Yeah, hello. My name is Prince Maguel Mokapa Ephraim Mukwalapan. I hear Jacob comment here. That is true. But I do want to suggest that I'm the community of Oukasie. I'm staying in Oukasie. I'm still staying in Oukasie. And what it says is true, but still not being developed. We still need more development of the education as we stay there, still there. So the book has been made for the people of Oukasie, including me and others we hear. So I want to make suggestions for that. Maybe the book should be evaluated. Then we still have much more to say in the book, to say what is happening even now. There is many things happen. If you can evaluate, read the book and evaluate and have much more comments, I think it is much better. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Noah. I'm a VETS alumni and independent researcher, and also I'm a professional blogger now. My blog is the Christocratic Parousia Monitor. There's something very interesting that was raised in the book. It's about the context which was created by the Rerum Novarum by Pope Leon. So it raised hope of political regeneration from the church. And this resulted in the creation of a Christian democratic movement across Europe. And thankfully, it has a ramification here in South Africa, in Oukasie. My question is, given that ramification in Oukasie with the young Christian movement, why didn't the Christian democratic movement in Europe accompany this initiative in a way of creating a political movement in South Africa, which could have been a serious alternative to the ANC or to the left in general here, so that we may not experience what the current plight of Oukasie, which is really a reverse of what was built in the past. Why did the European Christian democratic movement not involve itself in building such a movement, political movement in South Africa? Thank you.
Thanks. Some very big questions, but I'm going to hand over.
There is one.
I think in start with this one.
Okay, morning. My name is Anne Mokoshi.
We'll open up for
I'm going to answer the one of the brother was saying about Nyaupe. Yes. I was one of the people who was at the NGO helping the kids in Oukasie for rehabilitation and in the prisons around Brits. The problem is the leaders of today, I will say the politicians, they are after money. And if they see you coming up with something that is going to upgrade the community, they will pull you down. That's why now in Oukasie there's a lot of taverns, there's a lot of small businesses of Nyaupe, selling Nyaupe. It's the main dealers of Nyaupe in Oukasie. People from Joburg, they moved to Brits. And I think in 2018, the Taxi Association of Oukasie, they stand up with us, because when we are sitting around, we discuss how are we going to help these kids. And the Taxi Association, the taxi drivers, they started the group that we are going to rule out everything that is negative at the community. But now they are being detained. We are now raising money to make bails for the drivers, and some are being killed, and the houses are being burnt. I don't know how are we going to rule out this Nyaupe thing, because there's a lot of kids, and now there's squatter camps of Nyaupe in Brits, and the hobos are in Brits, and even Madibe, as Jacob was saying, there's a lot of unemployment people in Brits, and Brits is no more Brits that we know of those years. It's a squatter camp. We need help. And as we're coming here, we're saying the leaders of Oukasie of those 80s and 70s, we must revamp and come up with something that positive that will build that unity of Oukasie. There's no more unity, but we are going to win. And with the help of other people who did help us, Tafi Etla and Kally, I think we are going to come up with the strong movement that's going to be the opposition of this regime. Thanks.
That question of the European YCW would help us a bit to answer it because of the declaration of principles and other stuff.
My name is Kokoza Mtawa. I'm also from Oukasie, but I stay in Mutuku now, which is not west, but still in the northwest. That's the first part where we're trying to be made. Let me say, the YCW was a young workers' movement. I think sometimes we had a clash with the bishops because there are so many Catholics were in the YCW. We said no, but the struggle has nothing to do with Catholics. But most of us were not Catholics. And we can't struggle, can't fight a struggle because we are Muslim or Christian. And that was because we started a movement because of the suffering we're facing in Oukasie. We had no universities. That's why one new government are employing people who are educated. They take people from fourth year, and we always say they are employing causes. But in Oukasie, we got the first high school was after 1994. We had no schools, and that's why we had these problems. Now, in terms of there was no aim at all of forming a Christian political party or anything, because what we wanted a party which is controlled by workers on the ground, by the poor themselves, to fight for themselves. And what was unique with Oukasie, at the time, the first service delivery protests were addressed by the police. And they said, no, we think you should involve yourself in the community. Don't get involved yourself in the factories. But we were very clear that we want to organize a strong movement within the apartheid economy. So that, because we know that in terms of the war, MK and other, they can deploy drones or any advanced weapons to fight us. But inside the factories, they can't do anything. And that's how we rooted the movement there. And as such, the issue of us forming a Christian, most of us were protected by the church from the repression. I mean, I remember we organized a march, but we called it a Christian procession. And the bishop claimed to have organized it, but he was overseer at the time we organized that march. That's when I learned that even Christians can lie.
Oh, you'll never go to heaven.
And the other thing, the police used to ask us for permission to hold meetings. They say we must apply for permission. We said no, but the church does not apply for permission. This is a church meeting, but we are not discussing church meeting. We are discussing community problems and workers' problems in those meetings. And the church gave us a good cover to operate and build a movement. I think what is not there now, the movement is not there. We need to build a movement rooted among the people, among the poor and the workers. That will save us. A democratic movement which puts solidarity as the most important value among the people. And that's what we need. And that will solve the problems of crime, of Nyaupe and other things, and people taking charge of their own lives. And that's what, I mean, if at the moment, most of the township are dumping place for expired people, the factories that can do. If you ask comrades in what are artisans good at, they can't tell you. No? What our schools are producing. I mean, if you get comrades from other countries, they'll tell you no. In Zimbabwe, I've learned to manufacture yogurt in the school. Our schools don't do it. And it is upon ourselves that we introduce certain things, those things in our own schools, and we start fighting from together with other poor people, whether they're from Zimbabwe or from anywhere, to start building that community again. But we have no intention of building a Christian political movement, whether the Pope wanted it or not.
Can you give Moses just to allude to some of the questions that you asked?
Hello, I'm Moses Tuti, and I see my name is in this book. But anyway, so I mean the YSW doesn't come from the Christian Democratic Movement. That's very far. In fact, it started out as a small group in Belgium, and it was called the Young Socialist Workers, which I think became part of its orientation afterwards. But the church objected to the term Young Socialist Workers, because even though it was embedded in the church, so it changed its name to Young Christian Workers. Okay, and around the world it's called by different names: Young Believers Movement, Young Committed Workers, etc., and so on. So because it's got a huge, at the time a huge international spread, 120 countries, 600,000 or 700,000 members. It was a mass movement. But in countries under repression, it wasn't quite a mass movement. So we were operating in cells, and that's, if you like, groups, we used to call them, base groups. And it was very independent from the Christian Democratic Movement. It was always supported by leftist priests as well, that tried to make a home in the Catholic Church and then supported people. But as Oukasie said, in fact, we never preached. We didn't proselytize, as people would say. We quoted the Bible from here and there to inspire people, sometimes, and sometimes not. So, and that is methodology. And the methodology is really based on a movement at the beginning of the, 20th century, yeah? At the beginning of the 20th century, where there was a radical, I don't know if you've seen the film Dance. Now that's Dance is about this radical worker priest in Belgium, and from that tradition springs the YSW. So it's got nothing to do with the Christian Democrats. In fact, we have lots of problems with the Christian Democrats, although the Christian Democrats in Belgium are better than elsewhere. But definitely not from that strand. So, and it is always asserted its autonomy, its independence, and we've suffered a lot for that independence as well.
because we were not liked by, as you were reading, by the Communist Party, the ANC, UDF, those kind of people. So anyway, but yeah, that's our history. But definitely not Christian Democrat, sorry.
Morning, everybody. I'm happy about the book, but I was just told on Monday that the book of Oukasie is going to be launched in at Vets. So I don't know whether, because I was one of the action committees who was detained at those days. I don't know whether we are also involved in that book or what, because we don't know anything about it. We don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to allow Kally to respond to that in a bit. I do know that there is going to be a launch of the book in Oukasie, but I'll let Kally speak to it a little later. I'm just going to take two more hands. Coming back to you.
Thank you. My name is John Apollos. I just want to ask Kally a question, because I'm not sure if I heard that correctly, but in your remarks you said that organizing in Oukasie took on a form that was an alternative to the United Democratic Front. So if you can just maybe elaborate a bit more on that.
Dumela. My name is Lisiva. I'm a student at SWOP. So when you've been explaining this Gobetani, so I see a lot of many things are so similar to what she's been researching Gobetani. So my question, arguably, I think there has been a relationship between like our traditional leadership and the regime back then and still today, because that's some of the things that she's touching on. So I want to know from the community at the time, what was the relationship like the traditional leadership, and how the relationship is today in terms of the struggle, unemployment and all that, even with regarding to the booming of the Northwest economy today. So I want to sort of like touch on that and how that has changed over time. Thanks.
I'm going to give you the answer of Bethany. By the time of when we were organizing the unions in Oukasie, it was Mau by that time. And the offices were in Jamestown. And the people who were working at the industrial sites of breads, they were coming from Bethany, Jericho, Mabuluka, and Kabalatsane. And those areas, the chief of those areas was Chief Mangoathe. And by that time, the sisters of Mangoathe were teaching at the Roman Catholic school, Blessed Luanga School. And the relationship between the chief and us was strong. Ne? And the other chief of Jericho is the younger brother to Mangoathe in Bethany. And Hebron also was part of Bethany. Ne? And when we were organizing the people at industrial site, it was about 10 people. It was Lifi Mamabolo, myself, Lista Pilani, Mawani, and David Mujumwe, and the other people who were active by that time. BNS by that time was closed, and Mr. Mangoathe was part of those people, and Me Ellen of BNS. They started and I think Mukwalakala was one of them. They started the project of Fancy. And those fans, we were selling them in Bethany through the chief, because it was our partner. Yeah? And when we were going to organize the people to join the union, we were making a braai in Bethany at the Royal House. And people were drinking beer there, so that now it's just a function of the tradition. And by that time, we were filling up membership of MAU. That's how we organize the union in Brits.
I think the other relationship with regards to Bethany and Oukasie. First, the unions and political activism in that period was forbidden by virtue of the Bantustan, Buputatswana Bantustan. So most of the villages that Anne alluded to held meetings in Oukasie because Oukasie was considered to be central or part of South Africa. And one of the things that was mentioned in the book was that we refused to move to Letlabil and other places because we didn't want to be incorporated into a Buputatswana Bantustan and lose our South African citizenship. The people of Mogopa, when they were removed from Klerksdorp, Ventersdorp, most of them moved to Bethany, to their traditional king. And they held meetings in solidarity with the people of Oukasie and Pardekral and other places which we used to work with. So there was this symbiosis, solidarity. Thank you.
And going forward in 2000, in the transition, the now government have included all the traditional authority in terms of the Systems Act and other pieces of legislation. They are part and parcel of the development and part and parcel of the committees that are sit in terms of making sure that they reshape the development of their areas through councils.
Thanks. Just to answer your question, this was a limited project. It had limited resources. So I just interviewed, and the book is based on interviews in Oukasie, a limited amount of people. But my intention was very much that if this book was written, and there is going to be a launch in Oukasie so people will hear about the book, that it would be a spark for people to start telling their own stories, to talk about their own experiences, to talk about others' experiences, about what happened in Oukasie, and so on. And not necessarily for a book, because books are expensive and hard to produce, but that you can sit in the library and tell your children what you did, explain to them how they managed to get the houses that are there now, how they managed to get the toilets, how they actually still exist there, and so on. And I think there are still 1,000 stories that need to be told. And I hope that this book will just be a spark to begin a much wider conversation in Oukasie.
It's a starting point.
A starting point. Yeah. John, I think there are people here who could answer your question much better than me, and please, people like Moses and Fogoza, feel free. But what a lot of people said to me is that they felt that the UDF organized in a very broad populist way. And the way they wanted to organize was to get very slowly, very incrementally, and very thoroughly before they went into the community and did anything. And then having done that, to make sure that the state didn't move in rapidly and crush them, that there was a depth of organization that would outlast those initiatives. And I think there was a similar sort of feeling in the trade unions at that time. And of course, as one comrade commented, in the end they did smash us, but we lasted longer. But the fact is that post that period of repression, Oukasie was, because of that depth of organization, able to spring back and to move forward. But there's no doubt at a later date, people did start making connections with the UDF. There was certainly very strong support for the ANC when it came into power. It's not that independent strand continued, but it was very strong in those early days.
Maybe I should also mention that this is not the only book about Oukasie. The legal framework of the Oukasie struggle was also written by an associate professor at Wits, Richard Abel, disestablishing Oukasie. John Marie also wrote several books, and one in French, which was translated into English. And Richard Stengel also wrote about Oukasie. So there are a number of, and even some articles. Alan Morris, the Legal Resources Center has a lot of information on Oukasie. So people should go on site of the Legal Resources Center in particular, check other books that were written. And it's not only this book, there are many other accounts about the Oukasie history.
Thank you. I'm sorry we've run quite a bit over time, and I know that there are probably a lot more questions and comments that can be made, but I'm going to have to end the discussion now. There are copies of the book on sale at the back for 100 Rand, so those of you who are interested in knowing more about the story, please, Karen is standing at the back, is selling copies of the book. Karen Pampalis is also the editor Kally mentioned. I also just want to take the opportunity to thank those at SWOP who've made this possible. Hannah Dawson, Tasneem Esop, Gugulethu Mabena, who is right at the back. And finally, I think, like Kally said, there are many stories that could be told about Oukasie, but I think also in celebrating this book, we often celebrate books as the work of a single author, but I think the discussion this morning has also shown that it's a celebration of the struggle of the community of Oukasie. So I also want to say a very big thank you to the community members who are here today, and I hope we will have the chance to meet again in Oukasie with the launch there. I hope this is also the start of the telling of more stories and new stories, the chapter that still has to be written, that I think will be written in the struggles, ongoing struggles of the community of Oukasie. So thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again at future breakfast seminars. Also, sorry, a final thank you to Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the foundation that allows us to have these breakfasts by supporting us financially. Thanks.
Thank you.